Time for the last talk of the Recon Village talks. Now here we have Stephen Sheffield, who is a Vice President of Solutions at 3 Gym Balls. Stephen is an experienced intelligence analyst, skilled in intelligence, technology road mapping, training delivery and management. This presentation will focus on Clemson University's employment of OSINT techniques, emphasizing their thorough examination of digital forensic artifacts and metadata analysis. Stephen will further demonstrate how Clemson's expertise in media forensics and metadata analysis played a critical role in exposing a key player in identifying disinformation efforts that can be made. This talk will equip attendees with a deeper appreciation of the vital role OSINT plays in modern intelligence, operations, and the ongoing battle against deception. Now, there is a very interesting story that Stephen would like to share, and I've not put all the Easter eggs here in the title, but then yes, please give it up for Stephen.
All right, here we go. Everybody hear me all right? Excellent. So, I'm not used to standing in a mic like this, but let's make it happen. I'm Stephen Sheffield. I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm here telling a story of some research we've done at Clemson. What I will say is this research was conducted at Clemson, but these reflect the views of the researchers, not Clemson University, so don't throw Clemson under the bus. They're not officially sanctioning this. And some of this brief may be my personal spin, so don't throw the researchers under the bus if I say something you don't like. And we do have here with us at least one of the researchers that was with us. I think we may have two. Adrian Coliani here, and I don't know if he's here or not. Matthew Rippey are both here at DEFCON. I would love to have all my students here, but I don't have the funding for that. So, talk concepts, and I use it as talk concepts versus an agenda, because these things are going to be sprinkled through the talk. Specifically like tradecraft and research interludes, we would have had more of that, but I realize this is a 30-minute brief at the end of the day, and you don't want to be here till 8 p.m. So, who is the Media Forensics Hub? We're those people. We're a public-private partnership between Clemson University, these research organizations and NGOs, and my day job employer when I'm not going to school, which is 3 Gimbals LLC, 7 faculty, and a whole mess of undergraduate and graduate students. We run a creative inquiry, which is where a lot of this research comes from, where we take hand-selected students that compete or get recommended for the program and put them on hard research tasks. So, some caveats before we get going really well. Since submitting this abstract, we've made additional discoveries and expanded the network beyond John Mark Dougan. When I sent this in, Clemson and a couple other researchers out there were kind of the people looking at this guy. And since then, since I sent this abstract in, we started talking to the press about it. There's been press reporting, so I'm going to structure the article of things you may have heard about in the press, things you haven't heard about in the press. And this is ongoing research that will continue and grow with time. I was telling some guys beforehand, I got 45 pages of additional research last night that's not in this. It's still growing. Some of the graphics are already dated because we just haven't had time to build new graphics that show the new reality, but you'll get the point. This is a wave top briefing, not the final briefing. All right, if you want to know more, here are 4 excellent articles. Take a picture of the screen, take it with you. Clemson is quoted in at least 2 of these, maybe all of them, but I wanted to give you some easier reading than the invariable research article that's going to come out of this. All right, so how it all started, we ran across this webpage called DC Weekly that was being promoted by some known accounts affiliated with some Russian disinformation networks, and had stories that were generally pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine war, this, that, the other thing, all things that push the agenda of, you know, the Russian agenda versus another one. Now, what DC Weekly claims to be is a local paper that's been in operation for more than 20 years. And it's gone online after its print version went away. It's staffed by experts in Russian and Ukrainian culture and language is what they claim, which is odd for a DC weekly paper, but let's go with it. And it's based in Washington, D.C. What it actually is, it's operated by John Mark Dougan, and all these points here we're going to go through. IP address and whois records confirm this. Uses generative AI to create content, and you'll see kind of why that has to be the case in a bit. Uses fictitious authors. We're going to have fun with that one. Heavily recycles content from an organization called the Foundation for Battling Injustice, or FBI. Much like the previous IRA. Yevgeny Prigozhin loved a good acronym. And resembles numerous other seemingly American media outlets. So, we'll start with that first point, the JMD network. CopyCop is an SA, which is like an LLC over there, that is run by this guy, John Mark Dougan. And if you don't know who John Mark Dougan is, he is over there and he likes to talk about the injustice of the American legal system and how corrupt the cops are. And it might be that he's an expert on it because he fled to Russia because he was facing charges because he's a crooked cop. So he knows what he's talking about. Clemson came up with 160 web domains registered to CopyCop. NewsGuard came up with about 170. Recorded Futures Toolkit specifically documented 120 web pages registered by CopyCop between 10 and 12 of 2024. And what we found is they were all Chicago Chronicle, Chicago Crier, Houston Post. The Houston Post used to be a newspaper. It went out of business. So they got HoustonPost.org. Chicago Crier, Chicago Chronicle. Chicago Chronicle was the world's greatest newspaper, apparently, from like 1848 or something until some point in early 1900. But they're using things that sound distinctly American but are not. And we can provide whois documentation if you want, but my favorite is the day that, if you can see up here, this is the Wayback Machine article for the ChicagoCrier.com. Except it says Boston Times on it. One day they really messed up and kind of gave the game away when all of their web pages said the Boston Times, no matter which one it was. Fantastic. So, you know, John Mark Dougan's stuff expands beyond these fake American news sites to social media where he has Bad Wolf, because he's a tough guy. And this is just me, but he looks like the Temu brand of Joe Rogan. So, you know, he's cross-promoting his other stuff. I received a whistleblower letter about a military exercise near Nord Stream. It's as I said. And he also, in this, promotes another of these fake American pages. It's basically him corroborating his own story with another fake story. It's fantastic circular logic. Social media cross-promotion. He likes to promote, you know, his own stuff. And he promotes other propagandists. So here he has, you may not be able to see the title there, but it says Interview with Beautiful Spy, Maria Butina, Part 2. And I'm like, Maria Butina has serial killer eyes. All right, here's one. We're still trying to figure out the research on this, but he here is promoting Mira Tirada, who later becomes the head of the Foundation for Battling Injustice. And it's a group called the Schiller Institute that is the actual video, and we have an idea the Schiller Institute may actually be John Mark Dougan's paymasters. We don't know for certain. That requires more research. We're not there yet. And he likes to promote other Kremlin propagandists. This is a joke, of course. I am not asserting that Tucker Carlson is a Kremlin propagandist. He's a totally legit journalist. All right. Use of generative AI in story creation. Another hallmark of this group. And this is some stuff we found early on. We found hundreds of instances of text left in articles because these news sites are creating thousands of articles a month. And so you know they're not proofreading them all. And sometimes you get LLM artifacts left in the article, like in this one. I'll just read it to you here. It says, here are some things to keep in mind for context. Republicans, Trump, DeSantis, and Russia are good, while Democrats, Biden, the war in Ukraine, big business, and pharma are bad. Feel free to add additional information to the topic as needed. He left his LLM prompt in there. Bad prompt engineering. All right. Well, I guess it's great prompt engineering. He just forgot to get rid of it. More content. This is DC Weekly content, and it's your classic stuff for these type disinformation sites. Murders, rapes, and pedophile networks, the dark consequences of NATO's occupation of Europe. Olena Zelensky's organization accused of child trafficking. And then there's this last one. And this is where a lot of people took notice, because this is one of the few stories that actually got some traction outside of this little echo chamber. And it's the Zelensky bought 2 yachts with NATO war money story, which is completely debunked, but you still see it floating around Facebook today. And it was written by one of his fake authors. So we'll start with some of the first fictitious journalists. And you'll see here 4 journalists across the top in the Houston Post network. And they have names like Emma Bishop, Abigail Hall, Walter Scott, Michelle Bailey. Except when you look people up by that name, nobody works for that organization. And they all tend to write at least 2 long-form articles a day. And then at DC Weekly, we have Andy Fisher here. And Andy Fisher, you probably can't see it from your seat, he joined in 2019, and this is a screen capture from earlier this year, May 11th. Actually, that's May 11th of 2023, so 4 years maybe. Not even 4 years. He wrote 4,693 articles. This man is prolific. He writes more than Stephen King. All right. And when you look at his picture, if one were to reverse image search it, it's a wonderful stock image. So, but the real case study is this one, and some of you probably seen this one in the media. Jessica Devlin. She wrote for DC Weekly briefly, and it says here she's an intrepid, distinguished journalist, blah, 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 blah. And she wrote 22 articles before she left DC Weekly in an untimely manner. But if one were to say, reverse image search her picture, oh my God, she has an identical twin that writes at the New Yorker. A nice, I guess they were separated at birth, Jewish lady named Judy Battalion that writes wonderful articles, new mother leading secular life, feeling tuggings of her Jewish past. She was completely unaware she had a twin sister that wrote for a Russian propaganda mag. And so our organization and a few others took this to the press almost as soon as we detected it. Oh, I left out a slide. I left the best slide out, and this is unfortunate. She died almost immediately in Costa Rica in a mystery killing for exposing Zelensky. Ukrainians got her in Costa Rica somehow. So, RIP Jessica Devlin. All right, now for some stuff you won't read in the press, and we're going to have our first Tradecraft interlude, and I want people to interact if you have answers to this, but we hit pause for a second and talk about where and when clues, because this is going to play into how we prove DC Weekly, beyond some who is stuff, is run in Russia. And some of the other sites too, like all the ones he registered. So, geospatial OSINT, inherently about space and time, right? That it's got geospatial in the name. So, shadows are an example of when or where facts, right? We're looking at this picture here, and we see an aircraft, and we could probably figure out what kind of aircraft that is if we're an aircraftologist. I happen to be one because I was an Air Force intelligence officer long ago in the dawn of time. But the tail number's scratched out. So we know where this was taken, and we have a possible wind clue of the shadows. Because if we know where on the surface of the Earth it is and generally what time of year it was, we can guess what time of day it was. And in the case of this aircraft, I was able to figure it out within about a 90-minute window, which was enough to figure out when, using AIS type data, when that aircraft flew into a certain airfield in Moscow, and it gives me the tail number and the unit and everything else, and that's great. That is not directly related to this, but this is. What happens when the only thing you have is 2 win clues, 2 time hacks? Can you derive a where clue from just 2 time hacks? And the answer is you can. So, how do we apply that type of thinking to metadata you could rip out of various things on a web page? So, we have 2 win facts here. We have a screenshot time, because they were lazy in every screenshot or snipping tool artifact they use. They just left the default time as its name, and that always shows up in local time. And then we have the post time for when the post was made to WordPress, because WordPress timestamps all their stuff. So with the file name for each of those pictures and the post time, what you start seeing is, other than 2 stories here, which one was stolen Babylon Bee content that they had been reusing and reusing and reusing forever, and the other one that was an organ harvest story that was reused from other media, all the screen caps they do in the NATO soldier story, the Prince Andrew story, the Ukraine chemical warfare story, and thousands of other stories that we documented, there's about a 3-hour delta here, 257, 257, 251, 216, between when they screen capped something and threw it in the image or in the web page and then posted the web page. Now, where is there a 3-hour delta between post time, which is in UTC, so it's in Zulu time, Prime Meridian time, Britain time, whatever you want to call it, 3-hour delta forward in time? There's one time zone that matches that description, and so they give us thousands of pieces of metadata to basically prove time zone wise they're posting from Russia. He can say he's got people in America running his network for him, but they're posting in Russia. All right, that's a fun one. So hit pause for the next section of tradecraft. Let's say you have a whole mess load of stories that need qualitative analysis. Does anyone here know what Krippendorf's alpha is? Who's done grad school and had to do horrible research? Anybody? Anybody on Krippendorf's alpha? All right, Krippendorf's alpha is how you turn undergraduates or grad students into a herd of cats with group mind that can assess things qualitatively. So what you do is you give them a bunch of training material. Well, first you come up with categories to assign stories to. And this is something to think about if you ever have to do this. Do you assign the categories as the researcher, or do you let the students categorize the stories into groups? And sometimes it's more beneficial for very loose topics to let them do it so that they can easily achieve that group mind, whereas for very strict research where it must be one of these things, you have to assign it. So keep that in mind. But student-derived stuff is fine. And then you have to think about single-variate type, where we got one set of values, versus multivariate, where you could be assigning multiple different categorizations, and it can get real complicated. And the more things you put on it, the harder it is to get this Krippendorf's alpha number, and that is, the closer it gets to 1, the better, which is fewer and fewer deviations between your various folks assessing things. But the magic number is 0.8. So we had to get some students to come up with categories and then all get the group mind together about how you assigned a story to a specific category. And we built our herd of cats with group mind and turned them loose on a whole bunch of stories. And what you'll see here is the first batch, and we let the students actually choose the categories. And you can't see them down there, but it's broken police/judicial system, race and sex discrimination, pedophilia, religious discrimination, political corruptness, and violation of political freedom. when you start taking these articles apart, it looks like they are crafted just as much to cause dissension here as to justify to the domestic audience in Russia that things are bad over there. You may not have it so bad here. And you see kind of how that broke out. Since then, we've gone through a lot more stories. I just don't have the updated graphics. Organizations mentioned gets interesting. When you start running through all the stories and coming up with, and this was an early prototype, any organization mentioned, and you see Ukraine and the US are the number 1 and 2 topics, along with the UK, but you see other things in there, and then you see the FBI with the star beside it. Foundation for Battling Injustice gets mentioned in a lot of these stories for organizations that don't seem to be a part of it, but they definitely are promoting the narrative. So who are these people? And what you come up with is they run this kind of way. They have this web page, and I'm not going into all the research we've done here on them because this is about the Dougan network, but you notice some of these, like the Islander, the Intel drop, those have been there for forever, but several of these, I believe, New York Daily, Independence FR, some of these are Dougan network stuff, and these are the most common spreaders of FBI narratives. So the question becomes, are they Foundation for Battling Injustice sponsored and tools, or are they just allies? And you saw earlier the cross promotion with Mira Terada, who runs this. At least she's the public face. It may very be that this guy, Maxim, and I'm blanking on his last name, who has the face of a GRU killer, is probably the real runner of this thing. Until he died, they straight up said at the bottom, you know, the page was funded with generous donations from Yevgeny Prigozhin. And then when he had his midair accident, that went away from the page quickly. So that goes into our questions for follow-on research, if you will. And any of y'all that want to do research in this space, these are good questions. What is the nature between the JMD network, other propaganda? What's the nature of the relationship between JMD, other propagandists, and the Foundation for Battling Injustice? Is it more of a formal relationship? Is it an informal, decentralized relationship? What's going on there? Where do they get their money from? Who are they hanging out with? Who funds the Foundation for Battling Injustice now that Prigozhin is dead? There's some people that think it's this guy Ionov, who has funded organizations here in the U.S. Like, he even funded the weird pseudo-cult Black Hammer for a while. He'll fund anything that is throwing defamatory stuff at the U.S., so he may be running it. How have things changed since Prigozhin died? Have they become tighter, looser? Is the narrative falling apart? Is there no command and control? These are interesting questions that you could ask. And then this final one, and we haven't studied it. We have pretty good means of pulling a lot of American social media and a lot of things like WordPress, bulk polls of those, but how prominent are Russian language Foundation for Battling Injustice? How prominent are they on Russian social media? So vk.com, ok.ru, some of the others. And what does that say about the intended audience of the Foundation for Battling Injustice? And one thing I'll point out, if you look at the top of the slide or the screen capture there from their webpage, they have, I have it in the English language page, but French, German, and Russian are the 3 other languages that they put all their stories out in, or at least most of their stories. So it tells you something of intended audience, and especially the fact everything's done in Russian language. I would posit that their intended audience, yes, some of it is aimed at us, but a lot of it's aimed at their domestic population for stability reasons. So that's what I have. Are there any questions? And if you would, just come up here, tell me the question, I'll repeat it and answer it if I can. Yes. Perhaps. So what we're looking at there, let's go back to that. That's what I'm talking about with this being a wave top thing. You see very little shadow from them. This may be a composite photo. What I cared about was the aircraft itself when it landed, and we were able to eventually tie that back to some AIS tracking data and get that, but that is a great pull. If they do have shadows, they're not much shadows, which means the images may have been done at 2 different times of day. We run into a lot of this kind of stuff, and especially with that picture having come from the Kremlin page itself, there's a lot of deep photo editing there, which what amazes me is if they pieced that together and then just did the scratch across, get rid of the tail number, that's so sloppy. But yeah, that's a good point. And what else we got, y'all? Yes, sir. Walk up and hit me directly so I can. I'll repeat it to the audience.
Can you expand on how you use OIS to do some of the connections?
Use what to?
OIS?
Voice?
I thought you were using OIS data or not? I thought I read in your presentation that you were using OIS data.
I'm blanking on the word there.
OIS data?
Who is, yes. So who is data? What we use, especially because these people will put things behind privacy screens, some folks, so he asked about who is data, how we're using it. At Clemson, we can get sometimes historical who is as opposed to the current stuff, and often there will be a period of time between when an article goes into a system where there'll still be a name attached to it, and there are services that catch that. Some of them are things like HIOS's Insight platform and other stuff, and they also have other ways of getting behind privacy protections. We don't use them at Clemson. I use them in my professional work. But I can't speak to how Recorded Future did it, but they are a separate toolkit, and they were able to document 120 to him specifically. But who is data? It's about figuring out the corporation it's registered to. And that's really what it comes down to. And we were able to pull that off there and get the correct correlations. And I did not do that specific research, so I can't speak to exactly which services we use there. And I don't know anything about how Recorded Future does the magic they do. So, what other questions do we have?
In your experience researching with disinformation, how does different election cycles impact the amount of disinformation out there, or is there any correlation at all?
So the question was, in my experience, how does differences in election cycle affect quantity of disinformation, and is there a difference between elections? That's a good question, and there's a lot of layers to it. What you're going to get with that is, one, which country's doing the disinformation, because I talked a lot about Russia here, but other countries do disinformation. Other countries would accuse us of doing disinformation. So it comes down to which country has which interest in the election. A lot of people push the narrative that all of the disinformation in 2016 was aimed at getting Trump in the White House, and that is not what we've seen. The total quantity of disinformation, there were as many or more fake leftist accounts as there were, what you think of with a Russian disinformation account of, I'm MAGA Jim, classic American who likes Schlitz, beer, and football, and I love Donald Trump, ski, and they mess it up at the end. But it's not that. It was, in 2016, it was designed to cause chaos around the election, sow division, and that's always the Russian goal, is sow division. And other countries have different goals, and we've written some papers on, the PRC's goals are more to quash narratives that are harmful to their interests as opposed to sowing discord elsewhere. There are the Iranians who do disinformation, they had specific goals around 2016, and then we haven't seen, 2020, and we haven't seen as much of them since. I think presidential election cycles probably do see an upswing, but I would have to get back to you and what I could do is put you in touch with the doctors at Clemson, the actual PhDs, the real researchers, not a candidate like me. And they could probably inform you better on that. So if you want that contact, hang out afterwards. I'll give you their contact info. We'll make it happen. What you got, sir?
Do you assess the effectiveness of a given narrative campaign, like during your research, or is that outside your scope?
That's outside of my scope for this kind of thing. I know there are people who try to do that, but thinking about effectiveness of a narrative is hard. The best framework I've seen for that, and I can't remember which of the think tanks it was, but they put together something called the Disinformation Kill Chain, and it literally has a series of, does it reach this threshold, and when it gets to this, or this, does it cause kinetic real-world effects? Does it, topple a government? I guess that would be the bottom of the kill chain or whatever. But yeah, the disinformation kill chain is probably your most effective way to assess that, and I'm not an expert in that.
How do we follow your research? What are some other good projects to follow, and are there any ways that people like us can get involved?
So I do not have a link up here, and I should have put a QR code up, but I kind of scrambled to get this together. So if you search for the Media Forensics Hub at Clemson, and it's just that, Media Forensics Hub, you can put Clemson in there or not, it'll come up. There are ways you can contact us there. There's also, if you click on the CI, a bunch of student-run research that we've got 8 or so reports out now that the students have done. They get better quality with every passing year. And then we have other research done by the actual 7 researchers and staff that we have there. We have some data scientists supporting them. We have an AI guy that does some processing for us. They've got all kinds of things research-wise that I don't have any knowledge of. I work with the undergraduate student researchers to produce this kind of stuff. But if you want to work with us, get in touch with us. That webpage is the start, and anybody that wants afterwards, I can give you my contact information as well, and I can get you pointed to the right people. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about the feedback that the customers artists are. Like, do they create content responding to the research?
Oh, the reporter getting murdered? Oh, actually, I'll just jump out of this and pull a different briefing up. So, simple enough. We'll just open a different briefing in Facebook and or not Facebook, whatever this is, PowerPoint. I don't know what's going on. It's late in another day of DEFCON. Okay. This one should work. Nope, wrong year. All right. Real professional up here, but I'm doing things on the fly. Okay. So I presented some of this information at the GeoInt conference earlier this year, 2024. There we go. So if you scroll down, here's the part about they actually created no-joke content. Silenced in search of truth, the tragic murder of our own Jessica Devlin. And they had a whole long-form article and told the story of how she was brutally murdered by, and they even have a fake police report in the article. It's fantastic. So she got killed by evil Ukrainians while on vacation in a lovely resort in Costa Rica. The press reporting about her, yes. I kind of admire the trolling that takes. That's magnificent. And later on, John Mark Dougan acknowledged it as trolling later on his Twitter page. He's like, yeah, it was a troll. So he kind of undercut his own thing there, but whatever. What else we got, y'all? Yes, sir.
Noticed you have Maltego open. I was wondering if you applied any link analysis techniques to scale your investigation and do research at scale.
Yes, sir. Okay, so you ask about Maltego. Here we go. I do have Maltego up. It happens he puts things like his phone number on his Facebook page, and he puts things like his email up, which allows you to find things and then run it through Have I Been Pwned and places to see if he's been breached anywhere. I'm not saying y'all should do that. I would never suggest that. But there's a lot you can find out there. It's great stuff. If you want this file, I'll email it to you. And then to scale the actual investigation, we took the URLs that the different web pages had and ran them through a lot of different processors, some paid for, some free, on Maltego. Stripped out all the files. We've got, like I told you, this was a Wavetop briefing. We've got a ton of stuff, and one of these boxes down here somewhere is all the web pages that have ever basically put FBI content up versus all the web pages that FBI has on their web page. It's a linking tool, and that's how we're doing a lot of this stuff. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Maltego. So, what do we got? Any more questions? I think I'm out of time and then some, so what we'll do is if anybody has any extra questions, come up afterwards and we can chat. Thank you.